Welcome to the show, my final show of the month. I'll be on vacation on a beach by Lake Michigan next week. So I will be away. Bobby Hensley is here today. My wedding anniversary is August 7th, so my wife and I got married about 8 years before, I found out what it means to have a wedding anniversary in the first week of August, which, like if you cover a football team like Notre Dame and training camp is starting, you know what I'm talking about. You know what the subject is going to be coming up here in a little bit. So, there's pretty much always.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, thanks. So
I'm surprised she put up with you that long too.
It's a couple of weeks away, but again, we've got to celebrate, at the end of July before all that stuff comes around. And who knows? I mean, we do have the training camp schedule, and I'm looking, and actually our anniversary is on a Sunday this year, but it's like you don't go out on Sunday night, kind of thing,
You can. I mean,
you can.
Make it your own holiday.
But yeah, that's right. He is Bobby Hensley. I am Sean Stiers. For all you, all of our YouTubers, we are, I hope that you're happy because we actually started closer to 6 o'clock tonight as opposed to 6:05, 6:06. We got it going.
Anytime I show up on time is a good day for everyone.
That's right. And I mean, if people knew the backstory with that, I mean, there've been some times, but we're mid-July, baseball all-star break, and second half of the season actually getting started today. NFL training camp started, all that, but we're coming out of, yesterday was pretty much considered the deadest sports day of the year with Major League Baseball, the day after the All-Star break. But the ESPYs were last night, Bobby. Did you watch any of the ESPYs?
No. I have a hard time with the ESPYs in general. I know it's an award show. I don't like award shows in general because I don't care who's voting on stuff. Like when it comes to movies, I like the movies I like. If it wins an Oscar, if it doesn't, who cares?
Yeah.
Same thing with music. I like the music I like. Does it win an award or win a Grammy? I don't care. Same thing with sports. Did I enjoy this game? Did my team play well? I don't care if somebody votes on it. The only thing that's kind of cool about the ESPYs is you get kind of a year in review of what's happened in sports, stuff you might have forgotten about. That's the only part that's worth any point of watching. Other than that, we've already watched the games. Why revisit?
You're probably right about that. Had a question. What year for my anniversary? 1993. So this is year 29 she has put up with me. One more, we hit 30. We've got to do something big next year, but we'll get to that.
That means
go ahead.
The 30th anniversary of Notre Dame beating Florida State next year then.
That's true. I can tell you exactly where I was when I watched that game. I can tell you exactly where I was the next week when I watched Boston College.
Glenn Foley and Boston College, Tom Coughlin.
That's right. Yeah, I've never been into the ESPYs either, but like you said, you don't like award shows. I grew up, like pretty much watching the Oscars and Emmys all the time because I grew up when we didn't have cable in our house. Let's put it that way, so you had 3 channels on TV and that's what was on. So I kind of got into it and, being competitive and all that, sometimes, I'll just say, I think the best part of most award shows is the opening monologue. That's what I like about the award shows, like, especially, you get a good comedian, like when Billy Crystal used to host some of the stuff, Steve Martin, whoever they happen to be, because they always work in like the little digs and the jabs, at the nominees or whoever happens to be in the crowd there and that kind of thing. But it's kind of struck me that, like, when you think about the athletes, they just they don't react the same as the actors, at those award shows. Like when you see the look on their faces, maybe it's because the actors are sort of trained. It's like, they fake it well for the most part. Of course, unless you're Will Smith and, like he initially faked it well. And then, when he actually, when he was on camera and then they cut away back to Chris Rock. And the next thing well, he got that look from Jada in between, so it's like he thinks he's Mike Tyson after that. But it just, again, like, I don't know why we need to give awards to sports people when their job is to go out and compete. They shouldn't need an award for like best play of the year, best team of the year. I guess the SB, they put it on every year, so somebody must
Well,
still be watching that thing. So
it's a
I don't
mix,
know.
right? Because like you said, that Will Smith slap, how many moments of all those award shows you've watched come right away in your mind? Not many.
Yeah,
Like you watch it in the moment and it's cool to see, but like even like especially the Oscars, like I'd rather just watch a movie than watch an award show about movies.
yeah,
So, and then the sports one is really unique because their championship, that means you're the best team. Do you need another award for it? Obviously, the
exactly.
big thing about the ESPYs, it gives you content to watch sports wise on a day that you said is the most dead day in sports. That's all it really is. But the way that for me, one day a year without sports, I'm
Well,
okay
and
with it.
they moved it as well because like the ESPYs used to be, I think they were doing it like in the spring or winter for a while when they first kicked it off, and it's evolved, and you're right. It's like you put it on TV, when there's nothing else going on, you might as well. As Salty Virginia Peanut says, for the actors, usually means a big payday for the next several movies as well. Great point. Like
Yeah, that's a good point.
the athletes aren't necessarily getting a pay raise because they got an ESPY. Sky Shark, Norm Macdonald's monologue is worth watching. I have gone back and watched Norm, and
Rest in peace.
like
Yeah.
you talk about cringy, because again, especially that was like 20 plus years ago when Norm Macdonald was doing that. He was taking some shots out there. And again, like the actors or the athletes weren't necessarily appreciative of all the shots that Norm was throwing at him. So,
No, there's always a couple moments that are cool to see some of the athletes with personality or whatever, but I just think by and large it's not like must-see TV. It's almost like it reminds me of Saturday Night Live. If there's anything cool that happens from an award show, you'll see a clip of it the next day.
Yeah.
It's not worth watching 3.5 hours to see if there's one thing that's funny or that makes you laugh because you'll see it tomorrow.
That's right. All right. Friendly request as always. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, follow, comment. All that good stuff helps out the Irish Breakdown channels very greatly. We actually have a comment from YouTube this week that we're going to get to in a little bit. We got a lot of different topics. I don't know what you think about our list of topics today, Bobby, but I'm ready to roll. How about you?
I'm ready. I'm just going to follow your lead. You start it, and then we'll talk.
All right. Hot take time. Hot take time. Bobby, do you watch any of the hot takers on TV? Speaking of what you watch or don't watch,
I have a hard time with that as well. If I'm really bored, I'll leave it on in the background. But by and large, I don't need someone else's opinion. You watch sports. All of our commenters watch sports. They already have their thoughts. It's sometimes I like hearing about why they think that way. Maybe I can understand the other side or soften my thoughts. But we already all have our thoughts. So I don't understand the big alert of watching people, except for during the day on like the big networks. It's really cheap television to produce. It's unique content. But I think, like I said, everybody in our comment section has opinions. We all have them. So I don't need somebody else's that it's not, again, must-see television. I don't religiously watch.
Yeah, I stay away from it as well. Like I watch Good Morning Football, NFL Network every morning. That's not hot takes. It's basically, it's a football talk show. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, light, but they're talking about football still.
Especially on a Monday through and on a Friday, recapping the week and previewing. But even Wednesday, that can get dull.
Yeah, like the closest thing to a hot take show that I watch is PTI. That like I still watch that. But even that, I like the fact that they've got the topics on the side of the screen because, I'll turn it on, I'll scan the topics, I'll forward to the top, like I'll forward past, like the 3 NBA questions that seem to start off every show these days. I'm glad we're getting closer to NFL season, but that's about it, like is PTI. And even that's not quite, it's not like Stephen A and all that kind of stuff.
Sometimes I feel like ESPN or the mothership, as it's called other places, they put I feel like somebody in the morning produces their topics for the day and every show has to talk about them in a certain order. And sometimes the topics just are, it seems like there's an agenda there to promote their own, whatever sport they have on the network that they're going to be having. So it's hard for me to enjoy a hot take and then, they're arguing on purpose. Neither one of them probably care about either side. They just don't want to agree because that's bad television.
Yep. Colin Cowherd's always been a hot take artist. I never really cared to listen to him. But the radio station I was at before this, his show was on before my show, so I listened to him a little bit more than, I used to. So, just like with everybody, some stuff you might agree with, some stuff not. But, he's always pretty much been, like a radio show hot take artist because whether he actually believes everything that he says or not, he gets a lot of aggregation. And that's typically like where I see, the hot takes is not on the show itself, but the aggregation afterwards, either the social media or, like somebody grabs it and then writes a story about it, that kind of thing. And you see it after the fact.
Well, and that's what I remember Colin Cowherd. I used to listen to him when I was driving to college. I mean, that's how long he's been around. But he would always say, my ratings are so much higher when I have a take that's wrong the next day. Everybody wants to see how he eats his crow.
Yep.
And so he's always kind of put that out there. And yeah, does it really mean that he means those takes, or is he just doing it to be an actor almost, or a personality and some reason to watch him? It's unique to watch. And Colin, like especially him, I think he has football knowledge is great. His gambling knowledge, because he grew up he was in Vegas for a while. Stuff like that he's good at, but during baseball season, he'll even admit, I don't know anything about baseball. So they're thirsty for football content. It depends what show you're watching, what the personalities are, but some of them have good insight into certain sports, but not other sports. So it just depends who you're listening to and what their takes are.
Sid Irish said, anyone see Big Michael Mayer on Bussing with the Boys? He's a monster. That is a Barstool podcast, and we've actually got a cut that you're going to hear from that a little bit.
A little bit of a tease there.
Take and all that kind of good stuff. That's right. We've got a lot today. We've got a lot. So let's go ahead and get into this. The reason I bring up Cowherd is it takes us to our main topic. How close is Notre Dame to a national championship? And so Cowherd gets involved in this because he says of the 130 Division I FBS college football programs, there are 17 he thinks actually have a chance to win a national championship. And he's not just talking about this year. In his words, he's saying for the foreseeable future. So he broke the 17 teams that he has into 3 different categories. We'll talk about the teams in each category in a minute. First, here are the 3 groups, the 3 categories that he has and how he describes them. First group, the real deal group. These are the best rosters in college football. They out-recruit people. They almost always have the right to coach. They have the right facilities. They have the passion. They have the geography. So that's the real deal group, top of the heap. The close group, the teams that feel really close and could win a national championship, but they don't have quite the depth of roster or talent. They need breaks, but could win if they stayed healthy and teams in their division got banged up. So that's the middle group. And the third group, the still waiting group, he says these teams could in the foreseeable future win a national championship. This group's been dominant before, but we keep waiting for them. When it's rolling, those teams can beat the first group and the second group, and I feel like there is either chaos, politics, dysfunction, or they can't get it going. So that's how he describes the 3 groups. So here are the teams that he puts in each group. The real deal group, he has Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. In the next tier, the close group, he's got Notre Dame, Michigan, Baylor, Oregon, and Penn State. And then in the third group, the still waiting group, he has Florida, Florida State, Miami, Texas, Texas A&M, and USC. No, there won't be a quiz afterwards.
Yeah, I saw that.
I just wanted to set all this up, though, so that you know kind of what we're talking about. So first, we're going to talk more specifically about Notre Dame in a minute, but do you agree with this kind of tier ranking that he has, Bobby? And are there any teams not in his tiers that you would put in there?
Well, like we can get to teams in a second, but you're talking about his definition of.
No, I'm not talking about the definition. Now we're going to talk about the teams. Like,
yeah.
Do you agree with where he put these teams? Like the real deal group, for example.
No, I don't think
there at the top.
I don't think Clemson belongs in there at this point. I think that the real deal.
Because of one bad year, you're going to yank Clemson out, even though they've won 2 national championships in the last 6 years.
Yeah, because in college football, you're only as good as your last season because the roster turns over so much. You still have the same coach in place, obviously, and the same facilities, but they weren't good enough for long enough for me to be in that conversation. I think they belong in the next group down, but there was nothing about last year that says they're still in that level or trajecting up. All you saw them was crash hard. And
I can see what you're saying. I think this year, though, is going to be a big year for them.
Sure, absolutely.
That's what if they can bounce back you're talking about this year.
Current blue bloods, current favorites, I don't put them anywhere near that level. And I understand you're saying
they had basically
success.
Yeah, they had two generational quarterbacks who
Mm-hmm.
were, high first round pick. Trevor Lawrence obviously at the top of the draft, and Deshaun Watson as well.
Mm-hmm.
His other stuff aside, you're talking about two generational quarterbacks, and that's predominantly, they won a national championship with each of them. So I can see what you're saying, but again, I'm not willing to knock them out of that top tier just yet because of one season. This season's going to go a long way for me. Exactly where they are, I think.
You're weighing the championships a lot more than I am, I think, because Notre Dame's success has been stronger than Clemson's because of last year.
Well,
so I would almost put Notre Dame as one that I would expect to win a championship before Clemson at this point. I think their path, and we're going to see this year when they play each other, but I just think Notre Dame should be ahead of Clemson because Notre Dame's been on that playoff bubble. They've been right around in the playoffs or just out of it. And Clemson had a year that's declining that they didn't even look like they were competitive in some of their games.
Right.
I see what you're saying. It's 5-10 years. He's saying that's the group. That's the main group.
Right. And I understand that. Weigh track record though. Like you're talking about, but like, for example, here's the teams that I would put it at the top, the real deal group. Alabama, I would put Clemson in there. I would put Georgia in there, and I would put Ohio State in there. That's it. Okay. Those are all multiple college football playoff teams, all but Georgia with multiple. Well, I guess Ohio State just with one national championship, but they've also played in championship games. They've beaten Clemson, for example. So, again, I guess it's, where I just always think you can't fall too much prey to recency bias. Like you can't be Mike Greenberg and overreact to everything that's going on right now. You do still have to weigh at least some of the last few years, right? You have to take their track record into account. And these are all teams that are still recruiting very well. And, and that's a big factor in all this as well. It
absolutely is a big deal. But then you talk about recent shouldn't be your bias. Well, Clemson's recent history is what put them in this conversation because 10 years ago, they wouldn't have been anywhere near the top.
Well, but again, like you're saying one down year, quote unquote down year, a couple of losses, and now all of a sudden you're willing to kick him to the curb. DJ Uiagalelei is still a 5-star quarterback. Now, did he have a great year last year? No. We'll see. Again, we'll see what he does this year. And so I'm not going to push him out of that tier just because they had one down year just yet. Now, again, the herd has LSU and Oklahoma in this top group. I can't put them up there. I don't know. I've got to put them in that next tier group. I can't put LSU in, because again, they had a national championship, obviously, but that's the only college football playoff appearance they have made in the 8 years of the playoff. So they have. That's, they had a lightning in a bottle season. They had all this NFL talent. Obviously, the head coach is gone, within a year and a half after winning that championship. And the new coach they've got has to prove he can actually recruit at an elite level. Just because he moves to LSU and has a new address doesn't all of a sudden mean that he's going to be recruiting at that level. I do think he's a better coach than either Ed Orgeron or Les Miles, who both have national championships. But again, he's got to prove he can do it.
Yeah, I think LSU's a layup to not be in that top group. I mean, we're going to break it down extra because it's Brian Kelly, but why? What about LSU? I think they're a nice team that it almost reminds me of they recruit or the way they've done their runs is they build up for one good year and they have that great year and then they're down for 5 years.
Yeah.
So I put them in that middle group, maybe the bottom group, because I think that they've also had, you talk about one bad year that Clemson had, and we're disagreeing on that one. But I think LSU's had more than one down year, and that's why they have a new coach every couple times. So, no, I think LSU's not – I don't even think I'd put them in the middle group, especially as the SEC gets tougher. It's going to be harder and harder to be good, which is also why Oklahoma, to me, lands in that middle group. Because I think Oklahoma, in the Big 12 world, they're still going to be a player every year to make the playoff. And if you make the playoff, you got a shot.
But that's only a couple years that they've got left of that, though.
And that's why I'm saying that they go down to the middle group for me, because it's going to be hard for them to excel in the SEC. It's a different brand of football, and you're going to see the cream rise, and they still have a program and a brand, and they're not going to be terrible. But I think it's like that top layer is almost like the current blue blood program. And I know we've talked about that term blue blood and what that means in different ways before, but I just don't see Oklahoma or LSU being super relevant, because I think that top group is almost, you would bet money on them out of your bank account to make the playoff this year and see which one of those win.
Yeah.
And that's why I also don't put,
Sid Irish said LSU. Sid Irish, are you going to let me talk here?
I have to. I'd rather not.
Sid Irish said LSU didn't play football until 2002. And it's kind of right, because, now granted, they finally figured it out and they're doing a little bit different down there. But, I've got a good friend who covered LSU football for a long time. And he said, that was a fan base that was really entitled and basically acted like they were always good. But, the corner didn't turn until Nick Saban showed up. And now these other guys, have kind of taken the baton. And again, like, if Ed Orgeron could win a national championship, I've got to give Brian Kelly at least a chance. That's why I keep them in that middle group. I'm not willing to bump them because, like, again, when you look at those teams that were in that bottom group, I think LSU is definitely above them. Alan Krent said LSU was all on Joe Burrow's quarterback. I mean, that was part of it, but it also didn't hurt to have Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, to throw the ball to. They're two of the top.
They're working out in the pros.
Yeah, I mean, one of the best quarterbacks and two of the best receivers in the NFL right now.
And a lot of that lands on recruiting, because like you said, the coaches haven't been great down there. But
yeah,
I mean, the last 3 head coaches at LSU have all won championships. So you could argue, that they still must have the recruiting pull and the facilities, and they're in the SEC. I continually think that the SEC is just going to be harder and harder to win. And some of these programs that are elite are going to get knocked down a peg. They're just going to have to, like Oklahoma and Texas moving. Obviously, it's about money and not success. But those teams, they're not going to be like the top of the Big 12 might not be competitive with the top of the SEC, or the top of the SEC might fall down a little if Oklahoma slides in above LSU.
Yeah.
So I think you really got to look at where you think those programs will be in 5 years.
Yeah. See, and I can't put Oklahoma any farther above Notre Dame in this group because, again, okay, yeah, I mean, Oklahoma's done well in the Big 12, like you said, but now they're going to the SEC here. They've got a new head coach as well, and they've made 4 trips to the college football playoff, but they haven't even they've not won any of their semifinals either. And a big part of why they got there is because of the conference. Well, they've had talent. Don't get me wrong, but I just think it's going to be a lot tougher for them in the SEC. And again, I can't put them above Notre Dame like if we're tiering this thing, like Herd did.
You're putting tiers out. I'm very curious. Let's get very specific. If you have to rank in this process, Notre Dame, LSU, and Oklahoma, how do you rank those 3?
What order do I put them in?
Yeah.
As of today, based on everything, I would go Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. I would go. Now, this is as long as Oklahoma's still in the Big 12. I would go Oklahoma, and then I would go LSU. But once Oklahoma moves to the SEC, I would put LSU above them, though.
Okay. See, I think Oklahoma's still enough of a brand, and they'll find their feet in the SEC, and I think they'll still be better than LSU. I know it's based on, we're just talking about fantasy kind of because it's 5-10 years down the road here, but I just think the Oklahoma program will settle itself in the top tier of the SEC. I saw that comment.
If Ed Orgeron won a national championship, I have to at least give BK a chance. Sean Steyer's AKA the new Stephen A. Smith. That's like, I mean, can you disagree with that though? But do you disagree? Like, Ed Orgeron doesn't even have a job right now.
Right.
There is no universe where Ed Orgeron is a better coach than Brian Kelly. He might have been moderately, a little bit better recruited for a window. But again, like when you look at the bulk of those guys on that roster, most of those guys came from Les Miles, so.
Well, and Orgeron himself, they tried to get rid of him. They couldn't find any better, so they just promoted him from intern coach to coach. He didn't recruit all those kids. He didn't bring in that whole roster of all those players. He wasn't there long enough to build the program because he was so bad at coaching. He got his championship and he got out.
Right.
He might be the worst coach to win a championship.
So again, you moved LSU way down. I've got Notre Dame in that middle group. They're still knocking at the door because of what you talk, and especially now, with the way recruiting is, I kind of keep them in that middle group. They're knocking on the door. They're getting to playoffs. They've obviously, the next step is the recruiting, and hopefully that gets you over the hump, closing the gap like we've all been talking about for so long. Cowherd has Baylor, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon, Penn State all at the same level. There's no universe where Penn State is on the same level as Notre Dame right now. I'm sorry. They're the next tier down. They can't even win their own division in the Big Ten. They're not national championship contenders. Michigan, they've been to the playoff once. Look at their recruiting. It's a one-off. I've got to put them the next tier down. Baylor is the next tier down. Oregon, sort of at the bottom of this middle tier. I can see them, especially when you consider what's on the next tier down. I do think that Oregon is above them. But again, like when you look at recent history, it's not like Oregon has really been a true national contender by any means. They haven't won any big games lately.
No, I think Oregon's a nice little program, but also with what they're losing in the Pac-12, I don't know where they can play to be competitive. And out West in general, since the playoff era, has not had success in the playoff. Washington's made it. You could almost put Washington in the bottom group, but Oregon, I think they can recruit. They have the facility. Have they had the right coach in place? Have they, the climate, is it right? I don't understand why they're up so high, but they're the one that in that group that you mentioned that could be comparable to Notre Dame in terms of having good seasons, having a shot at the playoff, and you expect them to be, even on their worst year, being pretty good. I think it's a joke that Baylor's on there. I mean,
I don't even know where that comes from.
Is it because of that media market being big and they're valuable? Because they haven't had any success. They haven't flirted with the playoff. They haven't, they've never been to the top of anything.
Right.
So I don't understand.
They'll be better in the Big 12 now that Texas and Oklahoma are leaving. So,
but what does that mean? Just
by default. But then again, you also have Cincinnati coming in, and Cincinnati is a team that, again, like when I look at these bottom tier teams that he had, Florida, Florida State, Texas A&M, I'd at least put Cincinnati in the mix with those teams right now. In that bottom tier, they just made the playoff. They're going to the Big 12, and Luke Fickell stayed around, and they're still recruiting right now.
Okay, but if you want to talk about Big 12 and success, what they're going to have left over, I'd put Oklahoma State in one of these groups over Baylor. I think Oklahoma State, they've never won a championship, but they're always competitive. They're always ranked. They've been more consistent of what's left of the Big 12 than Baylor.
Yeah, they'll be interesting now. Again with Oklahoma
flagship. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with Oklahoma leaving, the conference is set up at least for the next few years. Now, what's Cincinnati even going to be? 3 years from now when the move comes. But I mean, it's really Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, Baylor should be at the top of that conference. Who knows, if some other teams change conferences and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, they'll be in kind of almost by default. I mean, it's been a solid program under Gundy now, and the guy's been there forever. But again, it's like they've always been the stepchild because of the fact that they've had Oklahoma there to contend with. And they're not even going to play the rivalry series for the immediate future after they leave.
But if you're going to throw Baylor in the middle tier of what he's talking about, I mean, Oklahoma State has to either be in the same tier or at least mentioned in a tier, I think, because I don't think Baylor's been good enough for long enough to be elevated over anything. So if you're going to pick a Big 12 program that's there, Cincinnati's a good one for the next group, I think, because they've made one playoff, and they still have Fickell. I just think Oklahoma State, something should be mentioned. And Gundy as a coach, he's proven himself to be a recruiter, to motivator.
Let's talk specifically about Notre Dame now. We both had them in that middle tier, but let's talk specifically, the most relevant question to this conversation. How close do you think Notre Dame is to, being ready to win a national championship?
I think Notre Dame's 14 wins away from winning a national championship.
Bobby.
In a row. They're going to be right up there. Like the way that everything broke down last year, they almost made the playoff. And that was going into the season. It wasn't supposed to be one of their best teams. So I think that, you look at a team like Notre Dame that's going to have another schedule with a couple key games. And if you beat Ohio State and you beat Clemson, I don't see why you couldn't beat everybody else in your schedule, and I think they're not far away from a championship. Yeah. I think this year should be a playoff year, and then I think I could see them going even further next year.
And I think that's what, Salty Virginia Peanut says Notre Dame should be in the top group. They've been to the playoffs more than once. That group has confirmed itself. Also, Notre Dame is on the way up. The only difference I think that I would say is, that group like the ones that I listed, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, they're basically, those teams have combined to win 7 of the last 8 national championships. That's why I have them in the top group with Notre Dame right behind them, because they've been, Notre Dame and Oklahoma right behind them. They've both been to the playoffs multiple times. They've got to win a semifinal game and get to the championship game first. But I agree with what you're saying. I think a lot of people, not necessarily writing this year off, but, due to some extent, that BK PTSD that we've all talked about.
It's very real.
At this. Yeah, that's very real. Look at this, to some extent, as a transition year. You've got a new head coach, you've got a first-year quarterback, and all those things. I think that there's every reason to believe that this year can be a playoff team. We know the hurdles that they've got to clear to get there, the 3 main games and, 4th maybe if you include BYU. But they have every reason to believe that they can be a playoff team next year, with this year, with next year being an even stronger case for being a playoff team. And then, you've got all those, next year is the 2023 class, all this number 1, number 2 class. It's going to be top 5. They'll all be freshmen next year. And then they move in, by that next year, by the time that group of sophomores, I think that, and then you've got another highly rated class that's going to be coming right in behind them. I think that's definitely that time where they have every reason to believe that they can be serious national championship contenders at that point, not just getting to the playoff, but winning in the semifinal and playing in the national championship game.
But there's a lot to unpack there, because I feel like when you look at Notre Dame's performance in the playoff and in big games, they're closer than people have realized. I think the gap in most of the years that they've been good between 1 and 2 and the rest of the field has been massive. So maybe they made the playoff. Maybe they got beat pretty bad. But then look at the championship game, and Notre Dame played Alabama closer than their championship game.
Right.
And I think some of the stigma is still around Notre Dame can't win the big one. Well, look at those first-round playoff games. None of them have been close. The average margin of victory is astronomical. I don't have the exact number, but it's always a blowout. I think you're looking at Notre Dame as a program that's elevated itself to be in that next tier, which is the tiers we're talking about. It's just people see that they lost to Alabama by 30. Well, Alabama won the championship by 35 against apparently a tougher opponent. So I think Notre Dame is a lot closer than what people have thought recently, and what their stigma is lately about not winning the big one. They're playing in the big one, and how many teams are playing in the big one every year? So I think that they're a little bit closer than the national scheme says. Now, I know that they still have another jump to make that tier. I agree with you. I don't think they're in the top tier, but I think they're closer to that top tier than what people realize.
No, you're right. Especially, I think, the national perception, because of what you're talking about, because it's not just them losing these lopsided games, but because they're Notre Dame and because they're polarizing, and because they haven't won any of these big games, and they have tended to lose, like the Fiesta Bowl this past year was the closest, New Year's Six type bowl that they've played in a long time. They've tended to lose those games. But again, go back and look at these other teams that are playing in these games, and look at the recruiting rankings and how that all matches up. That's why you've got to believe now that Notre Dame is going to be legit, the way, Marcus Freeman has run things, the way Marcus Freeman, is putting together these highly rated recruiting classes that Brian Kelly, said that he couldn't reel in. And that's, that's going to be the difference ultimately. I think that's what it's going to come down to. That's how they're going to, if they're going to start actually not just competing in those games, but winning them, it's all going to come down to what's taken place, out on the recruiting trail.
Well, and you're right. They've turned the corner as a program, I believe, when they beat LSU in a bowl game. It was an SEC team that was a pretty good SEC team, LSU, which it's funny that they keep coming up. But Notre Dame won a bowl game against them, and that was their first win against the SEC in so long. It was the first big bowl win, and I think that was years ago now. But they've gone up and up and up, and you can't talk about the top recruits, the top teams, the top programs, top history without having Notre Dame in all of that. So you're right, Freeman is a brand new coach, so it's kind of nervous to see where this year goes. But I think they just keep building upwards. Even with losing the most winningest coach of the program, their trajectory, which I keep bringing up that word, is going up. And that's something to say about them. So I think that they're going to be pretty close to a championship in the next few years.
I agree. All right. Next hot taker, Chris Mad Dog Russo. He's been filling in for Stephen A. Smith on First Take this week. And again, I haven't watched. This is stuff that I've seen, the video tweeted out and all this stuff. And the topic is still Notre Dame. Russo did his ranking of the most storied college football programs of all time. He goes, number 1, Notre Dame. Number 2, Michigan. Number 3, Alabama. Number 4, USC. Number 5, Oklahoma. Do you have any, do you take exception with anything in that ranking? Would you put Notre Dame at the top of the heap?
Like I say, I brought this up a few weeks ago, but yeah, I think Notre Dame number 1 I'm comfortable with, and that's not a homer pick. I think you can't talk about
national championships, 7 Heismans, 104 consensus All-Americans, more than anyone else consensus All-Americans in that list.
But Notre Dame has expanded what college football is. They were Newt Rockne helped invent the forward pass. Like he's the first one to use that, regularly. They were the first national team playing on the train, going out playing whoever, going all the way out to California to play games. They were the ones that kind of evolved the game. So I don't think it's like saying Kansas basketball. They helped, the legacy that they put in the game, Notre Dame. You
like
can't
when we're talking about blue bloods. I mean, this is a very blue blood college football list. That's for sure. And, there was a time that maybe you might have put USC at the top of the heap. And like the guys who were on with Russo or, doing in side eyes and all this stuff. Whoa, Alabama and all their national championships. And it's, again, you can't get caught up in just what's going on right now because forever is a mighty long time, right, Prince? So it's like you can't just talk about what's going on right now. Just because Alabama is dominant right now does not make them, the most storied program of all time. Sure, it's been a while since Notre Dame has won a national championship, but the history of college football is, the foundation is laid with Notre Dame down there.
I think we're agreeing on different ways, though, because
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying, yeah.
They haven't won a championship since '88, absolutely, but they have stayed relevant throughout all the changes of the game. Think about how much it's changed.
Hold it. You telling me Alabama has stayed relevant through all the changes in the game?
No. I'm saying I agree.
Okay.
I'm just saying, like you said, it's been a long time since Notre Dame won a championship.
Again,
how many programs have won a championship in that time? Not many. And Notre Dame's still relevant, and they still have been successful through all the changes. I'm saying they're the only one that's done that.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. We're agreeing. Saying that they haven't won one in a while. A lot of programs haven't won one in even longer. USC had a couple good spurts, but they haven't been sustained good. Alabama had a really dark time, until Saban came back and resurrected that program. I'm saying that I think everybody on that list has had ups and downs, whereas Notre Dame has always stayed relevant, minus the Faust years maybe, but which propelled them to get Holtz and then go to a championship.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the Davy Willingham Weiss, I'm moving my hand up and down, it was ebbs and flows. It's, they could never put together back-to-back good seasons. And, again, like for whatever shot you want to take at Brian Kelly, and we're going to talk about him here in a little bit as well. He did, consistently win over these last 5 years. And, that's something that you cannot take for granted. But again, it's still a program that has another level to go to now when we talk about now and national championships and all that kind of good stuff.
And even in their dark eras, there was still like a little shining light here and there. So like that 05 year, I mean, that team, they lost to Michigan State and USC on the Bush push, but they were still really, really talented and really, really good.
Yeah.
And I know that they had to rebuild a little bit before and after that, but even in their dark times, they still had a shot at something big. So Not a lot of programs can have that kind of success, even in their dark eras. Some of the dark eras are 5 years in a row of 500 or less ball.
Yeah, I agree. All right, another topic for us. And once again, we're sticking with Notre Dame. This one, okay, so Netflix has a documentary coming out. It's called Untold, The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, The Story of Manti Te'o. It's coming to Netflix a little bit less than a month from now, August 16th. Before we get to our thoughts on that, here's the Netflix trailer. This is just the audio, so you're obviously not going to be able to see their faces, but you will hear comments in this trailer from Jack Swarbrick, from Manti Te'o himself, and the young man who pretended to be Te'o's girlfriend, Lene Kakua. All right, so you ready, Bobby?
Yeah, fire it up.
Here we go.
Manti Te'o had an absolutely astounding senior year. His grandmother and girlfriend, Lene Kakua, had died the same night. He dedicated his season to them. It was an amazing story.
I mean, they were with me, you know. I miss them.
One problem, his girlfriend did not exist.
I don't think anyone can appreciate how big a story it became. This was a very sophisticated hoax, perpetrated for reasons we can't understand.
At this point, I'm at the Heisman ceremony. I don't know what to think, and I can't tell anybody what's going on.
He'll never say it affected his play, but you could definitely see something was up.
We just thought, what sick joke is someone trying to put on us?
My uncle immediately said, I think you're getting catfished.
Right. Read it all night.
Yeah. I created this fictional character, Lene. I totally felt fear. I didn't have courage to just be like, this is who I am.
It became evident that we had a major story.
I was afraid this was going to affect my NFL future.
I don't think he had any concept of how much the media will build you up and then tear you down.
I didn't expect it to blow up so quickly. This is about to hit the fan.
That's when everything went chaotic.
I love you so much.
There were two people. It was crazy.
My whole world changed, and I'm questioning everything.
So there you go. Again, that's the audio for the Netflix trailer for Untold, The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist, the Manti Te'o story. And Vigo was saying he's ready for it. What do you think, Bobby? Are you ready for it? I'm sure that people at least have some mixed feelings about this coming out.
Yeah, I think it's always weird when a documentary comes out about something I've lived through. And, working in sports media at that point, I remember so much of that. So, but yeah, it's always nice. It's such a unique story. It was a sign of the times almost, because catfishing was now becoming a thing. And
I didn't either. When that story broke, it came out on Deadspin that night. I was in my kitchen getting dinner ready. And then all of a sudden, it's all over the place. And the next thing you know, within like an hour and a half, I'm sitting at a press conference over at the Goog, and Jack Swarbrick mentions catfishing. I had never heard that term before. I had no idea what that was before. And it turned out, I think as he said, there's a whole series on, I think it was on MTV or VH1 or something like. There was a whole series about catfishing. I had no idea what it was.
Right. Well, I don't think Jack Swarbrick knew what it was either until that day, probably. That documentary, just the story just has so much meat on it. Like there was one guy, I can't remember his name. He played for the Cardinals in the NFL. And I remember he came out with like, oh, I know they're real. I've talked to them too. And then he got real quiet afterwards because obviously he had gotten catfished as well. Manti Te'o was just a star. And like for him to get tripped up and mixed up in a catfish and the way it all turned out, it's one of those situations. Like you said, you knew exactly where you were when you heard about it. Yeah. I was at my bowling league that night. I remember exactly where I was. And anything that has that kind of moment to it where you remember where you were, I think who doesn't want to see a little bit of a documentary about it? Depends how long it is. You might not stay through the whole documentary, but it'd be kind of cool to see. And especially that he's being interviewed as part of it. Like, how was he involved? I'd like to go back and get his like day by day process of that whole situation, that whole timeline. Yeah. So maybe it will be some unique new stuff. We all know the story. It's not old anymore.
And that's why I think, it would be one thing if Netflix, like what you want in a documentary is you're going to learn something. You're going to, like see, things that maybe you haven't seen or heard before, and that they're actually going to, dig in on both sides of this and get to the actual truth of the matter. Because there's still, and I just put up a comment. There are still people who think that Manti, maybe he wasn't completely, fully in on this, but that, he kind of knew what was going on and he played this up and that kind of stuff. I think, though, the fact that you've got Jack Swarbrick sitting in front of a microphone and a camera, you've got Manti himself, and then you've got the guy who, again, I don't know. I don't know the actual guys, the person who said he was
behind it.
Yeah, the person who was behind it. You've got
all the players.
Yeah, you've got the players on record on this thing. So that's kind of what I'm curious to see is what we find out that we didn't really know. Like what is the Lene person going to cop to? Are we going to find out that maybe Manti knew more than he was letting on? All those different things. I feel like, just, again, like how much you actually find out when you're, in the media and you're sitting there and you're in a sterile environment and interviews. And I feel like everything that we know about Manti, he was pretty naive, obviously, to the whole thing, but plenty of people do get catfished as well. But, I'm not like, oh, this is, just another, smear piece on Notre Dame and Manti and the whole thing. I'm looking forward to seeing this and seeing what we actually find out that's new out of this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's an issue, or it was, especially then, because like all of the FaceTiming and stuff that really got progressed over COVID, we didn't know all of that back then. So how hard is it to FaceTime with someone? And obviously he never did, or it was dark. It's interesting. And I want to know more about the timeline and see how honest everybody is, because he was gullible. You said naive. I would use the word gullible. They're kind of the same. It's unfortunate that he got tripped up by it and got mixed up in it, because he is the poster child of catfish now. When anybody 10 years later now, anybody hears the term catfish, we think of Manti Te'o, because it could have been any celebrity or any star. And even if he wasn't up for the Heisman, it wouldn't have been as big of a deal. It just all came together in this perfect tornado of stuff. And I want to see how the timeline works and like, what was he really thinking when he was at the Heisman dinner? Because he had a legit shot to win it. I think he got second in the voting that year. And he had to have known at that point. And like you said, people like, I keep seeing comments talking about the Kyle Rudolph interview. I'm sure everybody knew something was weird, because how can you have a girlfriend and like you're around these people all the time and you've never seen them, never ever. So it'll be interesting to see the timing of it all and see what players found out when. Players meaning in the documentary, like Jack Swarbrick. Did he just find out that day, or did he know before? And like, were they trying to figure out how to smooth the media over and move on past it, hoping it wouldn't come out? Or was there a threat that it would come out? And why did it come out when it did? Because it was a random Wednesday evening. Like, it just seems I'm more excited about the timeline and learning about the issue, because we all know what happened. He talked to somebody that wasn't real.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of comments going through our YouTube chat right now, said something about, well, he was with a lot of other girls while this was going on. It's like that doesn't make it any less true. There are plenty of athletes who girlfriends who, find their way to other people at the same time if their girlfriend is not on campus, so that doesn't make him believing or not believing this any less true, just because maybe he was with somebody else in the meantime.
And who knows, like, what the relationship was with the fake person, because maybe they were on a break, or maybe they got into a fight. So I don't think that holds any water into the situation. And we have so many comments flowing through right now, and everybody's saying that they remember where they were. It's just one of those issues that I think whether we agree, like it or not, it's captivating. And for some reason, it's held interest for this long, and Netflix is promoting it and making it into a bigger deal because there's still interest. It's still such a fascinating story.
Right. And that's why I'm looking forward to seeing this and, kind of seeing everything laid out. He did some of the interviews and stuff like that afterwards. And And it is. It completely ended up overshadowing a great career and a great season for a true, for a linebacker, because like even like Charles Woodson as a defensive player, when he won the Heisman, he was also
primarily defense.
You're right, but he was also returning punts and doing that kind of thing. It's like Manti Te'o was just playing middle linebacker, and he was like a classic just plug middle linebacker, an undersized middle linebacker,
a slow one.
I mean, as it turned out, slower, much slower than we ever would have thought. But I mean, that was just a fantastic season that he had, and it was that defense that propelled that team into the national championship game. And all of this, again, very unfortunately ended up overshadowing what a great season he had. Just for him to end up in New York as a Heisman finalist, and he basically won every other award that a guy could win that year. He won like 6 or 7, awards besides being the Heisman runner-up that year because he had such a great season. And I don't think that, the story that went behind this had anything to do with him winning those awards or him ending up in New York as a Heisman runner-up.
Well, this kind of piggybacks on what you just said about Notre Dame being the most iconic program in college football. If he's pulling down, LSU, is this as big of a deal as it is at Notre Dame because Notre Dame is such a big deal. And then, moving out of it, how do you move forward? Because he has to get razzed all the time, constantly. And I'm hopefully when he got to the NFL, his social media team, vetted everything he did. But right. I think he did everything right. Like you're looking at a guy that had more egg on his face and was embarrassed. I can't imagine the level of embarrassment. And he ate his crow and said, yeah, I thought it was real and blah, blah, blah. Like he was out front about it. At least he didn't just deny it or never talk about it. So it's also one of the reasons to watch a documentary is kind of for me to see like, okay, here we are 10 years later. What does he feel about it now? What were his thoughts? How has he learned? And like, how did he get through that situation? Because once the situation exploded, it exploded. And he still had an NFL career, but yeah, I'd like to see what his thoughts were as he was going through it.
Right. All right. We've got another Notre Dame topic now, as this has kind of ended up just being sort of a Notre Dame rapid fire tonight, but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the chat got going quickly once we started talking about that Manti documentary. And again, that's coming out on Netflix August 16th. So we've got, what, about 3.5 weeks, something like that. So,
and they have that Untold series has several documentaries that are already on there. And
do they?
They always do a good job.
Okay. I haven't seen
storytelling.
See. August 16th is a Tuesday. Next day, Wednesday. There's going to be a
usually
practice
the calendar works.
Notre Dame. Yeah,
you're on
that's
it.
Right. That's right. But I'm just looking to see like who's going to be on the show those next couple of days. So, all right. So we had this question the other day on YouTube. It came up like in when the show gets posted to YouTube and archived afterwards, people can still comment on on the shows, on the videos on YouTube. Joe Blow, seriously, Joe Blow is the user's name. And he said, question for you. I've noticed such a difference between the departures of Coach Kelly and Coach Jarrett. Of course, Link Jarrett, the baseball coach he's referring to. Why has the Notre Dame fan base and media been so down on Kelly after leaving compared to Coach Jarrett? Jarrett left. Hold on. Jarrett left. Players and coaches subsequently left afterwards as a result, but it was nothing but congratulations and goodwill for him. Contrast that with Kelly, whereby it's been nothing but negativity and sour grapes. I fail to see how any of the two are any different except the length of time that Kelly was there. Okay, so hang on a second. Before we respond to this, I'm going to play the Michael Mayer soundbite that I teased earlier in the show. He was on a Barstool podcast, and he is talking with Will Compton. So here you're going to hear Will Compton ask Michael Mayer a question right off the top. Here we go.
Coach Freeman differs from Coach Kelly.
A lot. This is no shade toward Coach Kelly. I love Coach Kelly, but Coach Kelly would never be around in the summers or anything. And Freeman's been in pretty much everything. And I think Coach Kelly was probably out recruiting or doing whatever he needed to do, but it's pretty nice to have Freeman around. all summer long, really. I mean,
he's just like in it with the boys.
He's in it with the boys. You know, he's in our lifts. He's in our runs. He's in it. He's you know, talking with us as we're running and bringing it up. I mean, after every run, he gives us a speech. He gives us a talk after every lift, whatever.
He seems like a good speech guy.
I'm not saying that's bad or good between Freeman and Kelly, but those are just their two different styles, and I'd say probably everybody prefers Freeman's style.
Especially as a player. I mean, like you said, like it's not like you're throwing shade. At the end of the day, Coach Kelly is a very successful coach who's went to different colleges and built programs, and you do hear he's more of like a CEO-ish type or more of an office guy, front office guy, which, again, there's different ways to be successful. There's different ways to win.
Okay, so there you go. That's Michael Mayer with Will Compton, and you heard the question. You heard Mike. Well, you know what Michael Mayer said. Bobby, you're shaking your head. What? How would you respond to all of this?
Well, first of all, he said besides the time of service to the team, right? That was his first. What's the difference besides? Well, that is a big difference. Brian Kelly was the winningest coach in Notre Dame history and left in cloak and daggers in the dark of night. And then he went to another program that's a lateral move at best. Whereas Link Jarrett left for his dream job, a place where he's been from, to get to the comparison between Jarrett and Kelly. He's always wanted to be at Florida State. That's an amazing job for him, an amazing opportunity. He built Notre Dame into something that made the playoffs that, you know, hopefully sustains itself a little bit longer. But they also could have just been a team with a good run. And it's hard to have a good run and to make the College World Series. So he already did that. Good for him. But he wasn't here that long, and his dream job was never here. And he was Brian Kelly. And then look at the way he left. Like Link Jarrett, we almost understand he left for a dream job, right? Okay. Kelly had his team meet at, 7 in the morning?
Right.
For a 2-minute speech after it got leaked out by the media.
Before. Yeah, that's right.
And on a random day again, like just they're not even comparable, the two exits. One, it's like we wish the guy well because he's going to his dream job, and thanks for resurrecting a program that's been dead for 10, 15 years. Meanwhile, Kelly, he's leaving at the height of it, arguably when they're about to make their best run, and him leaving might still be a good thing. But yeah, the sour grapes come from the way he did it, I almost think. And the way he treated the players. I
think that is the biggest part of it, the way he did it, you know, because there was actually a window of maybe, you know, when these reports started coming out, 10 or 12 hours where people were actually disappointed, you know, that Brian Kelly was leaving. And then when all these things start coming out about the text and the fact, you know, you knew he was staying out in California, you know, to recruit is always the official answer, but he's out there playing golf as well, you know, and doing all this, you know, and then just what you said, the reports come out first, and then he texts the team, and then they're having this 7 a.m. meeting that lasts a couple of minutes. Yeah. Whereas, you know, Link Jarrett was, you know, much more upfront, forthright with his team, you know, and there's also the fact that it's baseball versus football. I mean, it's like,
oh, absolutely,
the ultimate apples to oranges. The expectations are completely different because, you know, Link Jarrett, it's almost like, you know, football is scrutinized and overanalyzed 365 days a year. But, you know, college baseball, especially at a place like Notre Dame, and where they had been down for so long, Link comes in, has a couple of good years. It's really, you know, it's like a feel-good story that everyone can just get behind, you know, when they win a little bit. And then it's like, oh, now his dream job is open, you know, and he moves on for his dream job, and his family lives there and the whole thing. So there's a huge difference there. But even all that stuff aside, it's like, you know, I talked about this on Monday's show, and you know, that's where this comment came from. Probably, I'm sure, because of some of the stuff that I was saying, the difference between Marcus Freeman and the way he does things and how Brian Kelly does, you know, just listen to what Michael Mayer was saying. He can say it's not a shot, but just saying that it's a shot. Brian Kelly was an absentee coach. He wasn't there unless he absolutely had to be there. And the recruiting that he had reflected the fact that he was absentee. You know, that's like, just, you know, what you were talking about, you've got the all-time winningest coach in Notre Dame history, but at the same time, you know, there were people who almost held that against him because of the way he acted. And, you know, like, just look at the fact, you know, like, if you're going to throw the media in there, I'm not going to speak for the media, but just my own observation and experiences. it's like, this is a guy who, when things went wrong, was never able to accept the blame for any of them. Post-game press conferences, lashing out at the messenger, lashing out at the person asking the question, lashing out at the center for not being able to snap correctly in a freaking hurricane. All these different things
that really happened.
So Brian Kelly may have won, but it's the way he went about things and the lack of authenticity in the way he went about things that I think, his true nature was reflected every time he had the real opportunity. When things weren't going right and someone had the gall to ask him a question, that's going to come up when things aren't going right, he lashed out at the person asking the question, or he lashed out and pointed the finger everywhere but at himself. And I think that has a big part to do with it.
Brian Kelly, in his mind, were undefeated at Notre Dame because any game they won, he coached a great game and he got the great scheme and he won.
Right.
Now, any loss wasn't his fault. Somebody didn't execute. It was somebody else's fault. He wanted him to be better, but he always spun it as a politician, as you pointed out, that he was always in the right, coming out of the good side. And when you look back on it,
he's like the T-1000 in Terminator 2. He could shapeshift into anything that he wanted to because of that political background that he had.
But even look at the way that it all came down. That's what needs to be a Netflix documentary, is the last days of Kelly.
The final days of
Kelly. And like how he flew down there and like the fake Southern accent, the way he left one of his coaches recruiting in a home and didn't tell him he was leaving, and the recruit found out during the visit.
Ate all his barbecue.
Yeah, but like leaving your coach on the recruiting trail to let the recruit find out, that's so dirty. You need to let them know at least that you're looking or something, because right now you're just being so completely selfish. And the way the last hours of it were really bad, but he just never was a guy that was a stand-up guy. Like you just got the idea that he was just always above everything. And nothing was ever his fault.
It was always transactional. And again, like I was talking about Marcus Freeman and the pictures that I posted to Twitter the other day, Marcus Freeman is at this bowling event for special needs people, Marcus Freeman and the team, and there's no publicity at all about this. When Brian Kelly did those kind of events, they would alert the media, and it's like, okay, now the media shows up, to give them the good publicity for this stuff. And so then in exchange, Brian Kelly might give them a little bit afterwards. It's like, you show up and, give me my publicity so everyone can see me here being a good guy. Marcus Freeman, they didn't let anyone know they were there. I said this on the show Monday, even, my daughter was there and part of this bowling event. We just knew there was a bowling event. We didn't even know that Marcus Freeman and the football team and other athletes from other sports were going to be showing up to be a part of this. They were just there with a group called Uplifting Athletes. And, Marcus Freeman is that, he's hands-on. He's like helping the kids, roll the ball, down the lane. If Brian Kelly even would have been there, it would have been like what Michael Mayer was talking about, the CEO approach. He would have been standing off to the side. Yeah. Letting, whoever talk to him or, photos and everything else while the players are actually out there, doing the hands-on stuff.
And that was a cool event. Those were cool pictures that you posted. I think that Brian Kelly, the way that his attitude is, because like he was towing the line. A CEO or politician, as we're saying, he is like a watered down version. He's a Nick Saban without the championships, without the big wins. Because Nick Saban's not really a player's guy. You wouldn't see Nick Saban rolling the bowling ball with your daughter, and it works for him because he still wins championships. So like everybody knows, we're going to get grumpy Saban, grumpy crazy Saban, but we know we'll get championships. Brian Kelly, we know we're going to get yelled at and get grumpy Kelly, but we also don't have. We're going to get purple-faced Kelly, but he isn't going to win the big game. He got as much out of the Notre Dame program as he could, and I think Notre Dame is better for him being there, but I think that Notre Dame will be better moving forward without him. And then, like, you got all the bad out of Kelly that you could. Just the way he would yell at people. And like the USC game where he took the field and screamed at his players before halftime. Right. Like just stuff like that. You don't even Saban, you don't see that kind of stuff at.
Look, again.
And the dancing with the recruit was very cringeworthy.
He did something, the winning, specifically the last 5 years, and the BCS championship game season in 2012, 6 of the 12 years, there was a lot of winning, and you do have to give him, stabilizing the program, getting it back to where it was, closer to the Holtz era than his three predecessors. Now the schedule does have something to do with that, but at the same time, there's a lot of different factors that go into that. But the bottom line is they won more consistently than Notre Dame had won in a long time, and there were a lot of people saying that Notre Dame would never even be able, to do that. So you do have to give him the fact that they won, and it's, like, I'm not knocking him for that, but you're asking why people are, taking shots at Brian Kelly. It's for the way he went about his business otherwise.
And Brian Kelly he's such a polarizing figure even within Notre Dame. What he was good at, I think, was recruiting coaches. Because if he didn't have Freeman, if he had left the cupboards without Freeman, where would Notre Dame have gone or turned? Freeman, I think, was a part of the success already building behind the scenes with his recruiting and his defense. I think that, we almost take for granted that at Notre Dame, because Freeman was a huge reason why the transition is going as well. And I haven't played a game yet, but everything looks rosier. Their recruiting class is rated higher than any of them ever were with Kelly at the helm. So I think that him bringing in Freeman, we're going to see what happens. But, man, it's almost like I think that Notre Dame got as far as they could possibly go, and now they have a optimistic future to maybe go further.
I do. And, I was skeptical a few years back that, can they really do better, than what they've got? He sure is winning a lot more than anybody else has won. But, I mean, all it's taken is these last few months seeing the way Marcus Freeman has recruited. And it's, again, you're going from a coach who's been a head coach for 30 years to a guy who's never been a head coach before. There's going to be some growing pains that come with that. And, Marcus Freeman said after the Fiesta Bowl that, the honeymoon is over. We're going to find out pretty soon just, exactly what phase of this relationship we're all in with Marcus Freeman when it comes to Saturdays, So that's really the biggest question that he has to answer is how he handles all those decisions that Brian Kelly could, for the most part, navigate, like all that experience that Brian Kelly had. It won him some extra games here and there,
And Brian Kelly, I mean, we could talk about Brian Kelly in this for next 5 hours, but Brian Kelly had other head coaches on his staff that always helped. What's helping with Freeman, I think, just the perception. The honeymoon might have been over after losing that Fiesta Bowl, but I think that he bought himself a longer honeymoon by relying more on the Notre Dame family. He doesn't have head coaching experience, but he wants to be a Notre Dame man. He wants to go back to some of the traditions that Notre Dame used to have before Kelly that he doesn't understand why they stopped. So I think that Freeman's given himself a little bit more of a honeymoon, and he's relying on the right people in terms of building the Notre Dame brand, being a Notre Dame man in the Notre Dame program.
Now here's something Salty Virginia Peanut says, agree, Bobby. I don't give Kelly much credit at all beyond keeping a coaching staff with elite elements, but also failures he would keep until forced to fire them. So that's the other side. Well, yeah, Brian Van Gorder, basically, purged that staff after 2016, and it was coming to a situation with Quinn and Alexander. Had he not, taken this job at LSU, what was he going to do with those guys? Because, it didn't take Marcus Freeman very long to figure out who he wanted to keep on his staff, and Quinn and Alexander weren't going to be two of them. And those were guys, like with these last couple of years where, we're ripping this offensive line and, why aren't they performing better? And all this, Jeff Quinn was in a gots to go situation. And like when you hear, like recruits talk about Chancey Stuckey compared to Del Alexander. And again, it comes down to these relationships that we're talking about in recruiting. There is just a huge difference. Harry Heastan was never coming back if Brian Kelly was still the head coach, so that's part of it too. And, so there is, he's made some good hires along the line, but he's also, stuck to his guns with too much loyalty at times as well, and kept guys on who probably didn't deserve to be on the staff like those guys.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on it, because everything that comes up Kelly, you start to get you can feel your blood boiling a little bit. It just is a nasty feeling. But look at the positive vibe of the program. Look at their trajectory. Look at everything that's going well for them. There's nobody around the program that says anything negative. Whereas before, people might not have said negative things, but they were quiet. And now you're just hearing all the positivity, and it's just going in such a good direction that I think people used to cheer against Kelly because Notre Dame's already polarizing enough. Whereas some of those tweener fans, they'll be cheering for Freeman because of how positive he is and how much he puts himself out there in a good, positive way.
Yeah. I concur. Man, we have ripped through a lot of different topics tonight. I want to get this one before we wrap up. We usually try to keep it to around an hour. We don't have like a set timeline, but we've had a lot of good stuff that we've been talking about tonight.
As long as they're commenting, we'll keep going.
This one, yeah, that's right. There's a non-Notre Dame question that we'll kind of finish up with tonight. It's going to relate, to Notre Dame, but it's not a Notre Dame specific question. The NCAA's Division I Council is recommending that the NCAA get rid of the one-time part of its transfer rule. So like right now, if you're a transfer, you get one time and you can go and, the first transfer, you can go play right away. But if you transfer again, that after that second time, you would have to sit out for a year before you're eligible to play. So the Division I Council is recommending getting rid of that one-time part of the transfer rule so that any player would be able to transfer and have immediate eligibility. So you could theoretically, start your career at Notre Dame, transfer to Michigan, play right away, transfer to Indiana, play right away, and then transfer to Louisville and play right away. You could play theoretically at 4 schools in 4 years and never have to sit out for any of it. So what do you think of that, Bobby?
I don't like it. I think what you're going to get with that is you're going to lose the high school recruiting. You're just going to be recruiting freshmen and sophomores every year, even if they've already moved once.
Yeah.
It's already out of hand almost how you can build your program with a rental, for a year. I don't think that, because, you get to these programs where they're only missing one piece. You're going to have a guy that would win 4 national championships in 4 years at 4 different programs. And
I think this Jordan Addison thing from Pittsburgh to USC, that is nothing. Like Jeremy, we just got a comment. This is free agency, and that's exactly what I was thinking. Like Lane Kiffin, was talking at SEC Media Days this week about, essentially it's like you're putting together it's like roster management. Basically, you've got a salary cap, or that you've got talking about payrolls, and that's essentially what it's going to be. Like when you mix in, like with NIL being introduced, they needed to go the other way. Like to me, and I think Brian and I have talked about this before, I felt like they needed to go the other way and reinstitute the you need to sit out for a year before you're eligible to play because of NIL and the fact that, schools could use it as an inducement, just like with Jordan Addison, to get him from Pittsburgh to USC. So instead of actually putting some restraint in the process, now you're just going to open it up and say, just go ahead. You can transfer as many times as you want and just keep on playing.
When you had that topic, I thought that was a typo, because I was like, there's no way they would deregulate it even more to let them go wherever, whenever. Well, at one point, do they just transfer in the middle of the season and play the next week at another program at this point? I like the idea of them sitting out a year, unless I feel like there should be a caveat that if a coach leaves, there should be open to leave a program.
Right.
Because that's kind of not fair to a guy who might be a good throwing quarterback and they bring in an option coach. And it's like, well, I'm stuck here now. But I think there needs to be a year out anyway, unless there's extremely crazy circumstances. But just to let it be a free market out there, why would you recruit any high school players? If you're a true freshman, if you're not starting your first year, you're going to transfer somewhere else anyway.
Yeah.
And be re-recruited. And the recruiting will never stop. So I think there needs to be some sort of tie to the player and the program.
It feels like Notre Dame is in a little bit better place than a lot of these other schools because of the fact, where they are with the academics and stuff like that. Again, that doesn't mean, make them like exempt from it, like it's never going to happen at Notre Dame. But it feels like because you have guys who are signing up, for the academics, they know what they're getting into and all these different things that maybe, because of the uniqueness of a place like Notre Dame, that maybe they might not be affected as much. But at the same time, it's just a whole different can of worms. And I can't believe they're opening it up. Like they're considering, it hasn't been approved yet, but they're considering opening it up like this. And, and like we keep hearing like, well, is the Power Five going to break away? And, all this talk with, all the conference realignment and, is it, do the football, programs just need to break away from the NCAA? Well, the problem with that is you still need some kind of oversight. You still need some kind of governing body to make rules like this. You can't just pull away and say, now all our problems are solved, because someone still has to put rules in place, whether it's the NCAA or anybody else. It's just that the NCAA keeps making horrible decision after horrible decision. So it's like, who has confidence in the NCAA at all right now? I don't think you'd find many shows of hands.
You almost hope that they're like, yeah, it's been pressured for them to bring it up. And they'll say like, yeah, we're going to bring it up and talk about it and then never pass it. That's kind of what you're hoping for. But like you said, they've gone down the road of wrong decisions so many times. Each time they make a good decision, they make two bad ones, it seems like. So I think you're looking at a situation where they can't. There's no way they can just let anybody free. Like I say, how do you fix it? I say you go, like Sean said, you go back to a 1 year, you have to sit out. Because without this 1 year sitting out, they're going to transfer who was it from Clemson, their quarterback a few years ago that transferred in the middle of the season, and he didn't play his next place. Right. Kelly was his last name, I think.
Yeah.
Or something.
The guy that got overtaken by Trevor Lawrence, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you need to have some sort of tie to keep them at the program. Otherwise, recruiting as a whole will collapse, because then you're going to have the MAC recruit high school, and then the big programs will recruit from the MAC, and then every year it's just going to be a feeder system within itself. And the only way you fix it, Kelly Bryant. Thank you. I think you just have to make them sit out or have some sort of penalty, or only allow so many scholarships to a program. And if you offer that scholarship to a program, you have to honor that spot for 3 years, even if the guy transfers. I don't know if that'll help anything, but they won't be able to take in as many scholarship athletes. I don't know if that would work, but it's something. There has to be some way to not just make it a free market.
Tyler, it was Kelly Bryant, not Bryant Kelly. You were right the first time. It's like Bobby had the first name right, and I couldn't remember the last name. But
a lot of Kelly in this episode.
That's right. Tyler, that's very true. That's very true. Tyler with the assist. So, yeah, it's a bad situation. I have no idea what would spur the NCAA to think this is a good idea, because again, they already totally whiffed on NIL, and the anniversary of NIL. We just hit the 1 year anniversary of the adoption of NIL. It's a total train wreck, and doing this only makes it even worse. Like, they couldn't figure out, how to properly manage NIL, because they didn't want NIL, and the states ended up pushing it through to begin with. And so now you've got NIL, and it's, we just saw how it impacts things like transfers and, players being lured away. So the fact that they would look at that and have that in front of them just a couple months back, like with the Jordan Addison thing specifically, they'd have that as an example right in front of them. Now they say, oh, by the way, we're just going to open it up, and it's not just going to be a one-time transfer rule. It's just open transfer. It just makes no sense that they would decide to go that direction.
And who knows what anything is, because the future of college football is going to be so different with the conferences jumping and realignment and these TV deals. I almost wonder if they're just trying to leave themselves an out, so that if a guy's already transferred, he can transfer again if his school goes from a major conference to a non-major conference or leaves the NCAA. I just almost feel like they're leaving themselves loopholes, but while doing so, they're ruining recruiting and ruining the game.
Yep. All right, well, we will go ahead and end it on that for tonight. A lot of great stuff. Appreciate all the enthusiasm in the YouTube chat tonight. Had a lot of great input going on there, and a lot of great discussion tonight as well on a lot of different topics. I hope we got someplace.
We got somewhere. If not, we can just transfer.
The next time we talk, Bobby, which will be 2 weeks from today, or at least on the show anyway, we'll be just a little bit more than 1 week away from the start of training camp. So we've got that going for us.
Yeah. By then, the White Sox will be up in first place.
You can always dream, right?
We all can.
All right. Have a great weekend. Have a great week. I'll be gone next week. Vince is going to be, I think, doing most of the hosting next week. I believe Bobby and Jesse and Brian, maybe Ryan, I don't know, will be contributing to some extent. And then I'll try not to get too sunburned and be
Humble
back.
brag.
That's right. Be back the week of August 1st, getting ready for the first day of training camp for Notre Dame on August 5th. Looking forward to that. Don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe, rate, review, all that great stuff. You help us out. Bobby, I will talk to you later and talk to you all later very soon as well. Again, have a great weekend. Talk to you in a couple weeks. And don't forget, IB Nation Sports Talk will be back next week still.